excited about life, and then they take that back home to they take that back to their partners and their teams and their families and whatnot, and it's just, yeah, I don't know what to say. I love it.
Yeah, it does sound like you get very excited talking about it as well. And tell us a little bit like what do you do on a day-to-day basis, perhaps now that you work for yourself? Yeah.
Well, there is a really fun part, which is I actually get to get on calls with my clients, right? And I get to see the transformation during the calls, right? Then obviously there's the not so fun part, being a solopreneur, where you still have to figure out everything, right? You still have to do your own accounting, you still have to do your own lead gen and business development. But then occasionally I get to do fun stuff like being on this webinar with you guys right now.
Lovely. Glad to
Yeah.
hear that. So I think one of the reasons why people are attending this call, and maybe they are working in digital as well, and they're scaling. And I think when we were catching up, you mentioned something about scaling a startup from 300 to 800 people in just a few years. Can you share a little bit more about that experience? How was it like doing so? Yeah.
Um, well, it was interesting. So I joined PathNet when we were about 300 people. And by the time I left PathNet, in fact, we had gone up to about 1,000 people at some point, and then like we had cut it back down to about 800. So um, it was this really interesting, awkward phase of a company. It's like growing from a teenager into an adult, and you're trying to, get from being a semi-functional teenager, and you're like, maybe I can do my own laundry now, to being a fully functional adult, which is, oh, I can manage my money and my investments and also my career at the same time. There was a lot of change, which was very exciting. We brought on board a lot of senior people from other companies that, like I think in at least my personal career that I never had the opportunity to work with before. And it was great because I got to learn so much from those leaders. But at the same time, so much change was going on in the company. It was, to be honest, very chaotic. It's probably the same with any hyper-growth startup. It was chaotic in a number of ways, right? For one, you're trying to integrate people from very different cultures, right? You usually have the original people in a startup, or the very early people in a startup that's been there since day one, who are, they're not necessarily the most experienced managers or operators, but they're super passionate. They know everything about the company and the product. And then you have the experts that are like coming in, and they come from bigger companies where they have larger teams and whatnot. Like trying to integrate, different cultures of people was really interesting. And then of course, sheer number of people was growing so drastically that certain things are going to break. Like how you organize your teams is going to become more challenging. Right now, you have more people, more teams, and more like sort of like cross-team collaboration that needs to happen. All of that becomes quite tricky.
Yeah, so at a point in time when you were growing the company from 300 to close to 1,000 people, now having gone through that experience, and I believe you were in a product role, what would you do differently, given the chance again? Yeah, knowing what you know.
So, I think even at that time, I was one of the first senior product people brought into the company. And part of my unofficial role was to kind of change how we did product development and how we thought about product development. What we had done in the past had worked very well for us up to a certain point. The company had already, matured, the product had matured, and we just needed to do things a little bit differently. So whilst there was all of this change from an organization perspective going on, like we were also trying to transform into how we build product, right? And I think like one of the things, what I knew at that time, I'll talk about what I knew at that time and what I was trying to do at the time. And then also like what I didn't know or wish I knew at that time. And what I knew at that time was I was like, okay, look, I know like how we can organize a team to come together to build like a world-class, product UX, practice, right? Like I know that we need to do a bit more research. I know we need to get closer to customers. I know we need faster development cycles. I know that we need more data, right? Quantitative and qualitative research, like that, all that part I knew. And you know, I wasn't the only one in the organization who knew. There were all these people coming into the organization. We had a VP of growth, we had a new director of design, and we had like this new VP of product as well. And like a lot of us, like we knew what that looked like, you know, at the end. And there was a lot of momentum behind it. At the same time, what I didn't know at the time, and by the way, we made quite a bit of progress just knowing those things, right? Yes, it was a struggle kind of getting there. But like, for example, we started taking analytics, like product analytics, much more seriously. We started hiring specialized like user researchers, right? And we started bringing all these things together, and we started showing the organization, hey, this is what we can do. On my part, I ran the product analytics team. It was like, okay, let's build product analytics from scratch. You know, we had a small team. You know, we set up the product analytics stack. And then we knew we wanted to make product analytics accessible to anyone in the company, not just product managers, not just the UX team, right? But like anyone. And then, so we were doing that. We were training people. We were teaching people how to use analytics tools, how to interpret data, etc. And we got quite far. Eventually, at some point, about 15% of the company in all our different offices, we had offices in the US and London, we had like 4 offices in China, Singapore. Like we had people in all the offices using our analytics stack, like every month, right? Like, so we got quite far with that. That was what sort of like we knew. The part that was really missing, which I didn't, you know, somehow just like didn't get until I started coaching, was the human aspect of transformation. Sounds a little bit naive on the hindsight. Maybe I was a little bit naive then, but it wasn't until I started coaching, right? And one of my fellow coaches also happened to be a team coach at that time, and he started talking about this, and I was like, oh, so that's what was missing. This is what I've been trying to do my entire life, building organizations, right? Like you have the hard, you know, very technical aspects of it, right? Which is know-how, training, you know, designing the organization itself. And then I hate to use the word softer, but like the more human aspect of it, which is change, right? Like it's very hard for people to deal with change. It's very hard for organizations to deal with change, right? And if we look at the organizations that have the most successful sort of transformation, right? Like DBS comes up a lot, right? And if you ask UX people, the UX people are like, oh yeah, we transformed DBS. And if you read the other side of the story from people who are organizational development practitioners, right? OD practitioners, right? They have their own sets of articles that are like, oh, this is how we brought change about in DBS, right? But the truth is, like, you need both, right? You need both of those, right? You can't just have the technical aspect and then ignore the human aspect of it. But you also can't just have the human aspect and then not know how are we going to change the organization and what, you know, great looks like. So it's really about, like, if we want to do change, right, in an organization, it's really about bringing those two aspects together.
Yeah, and that's really great. Thanks for sharing. And that's also one thing I think many of the audience members are interested in is how to implement change at a organization level, at a system level. So you mentioned something about coaching and systems coaching. You know, for those who are not familiar with the term, could you just explain what that is, and maybe if given a choice to implement it back then, you know, what might you have actually done? Yeah.
Gotcha. So there's coaching, right? And then so we need to first talk about coaching, and then we talk about what systems coaching is, right? Coaching fundamentally, so like I contrast it to like consulting, right? Like, or advising, right? Which is, I'm the expert, I come in and I tell you what to do, right? Coaches are more like, as coaches, we're more like, look, we're not the experts in your domain or your business or anything, right? But what we're really good at are people and relationships, right? We're really good at you. That's what we're really good at. So as coaches, what we usually do is we empower people to come to their own conclusions, right, about what's right for them, right? So that's coaching, right? It's about like surfacing all the, if you know iceberg sort of an analogy, right? That's that 10% that's visible and then 90% that's not visible. Our job is to surface as much of that 90% as possible so that you can make an informed decision for yourself, right? So that's coaching. And then system coaching is basically a fancy term, right? It's basically coach speak, where you coach a team instead of an individual, right? Which is similar, but a little bit different. So I trained as a team coach as well. And usually what we do is then, okay, now we talk about what that might look like when you implement it in an organization is, let's say we want to talk about change, right? Oh, hello.
Yeah, I'm still there.
Oh, you're still here. I think we froze for a bit.
Yeah, my video freeze a little.
Talking about icebergs.
Yeah, all good now. Yeah.
Yeah. So what that might look like in an organization is that, let's say you want change to happen, right? Well, here's the question: how is everyone even feeling about change? Because obviously everyone verbally says, oh yeah, we need to change, we need to innovate, we need to be more agile, we need to be more customers, and everyone, we need to be be more, data informed, right? Everyone says that, right? But what's actually really going on beneath the surface, and one thing that we do as a team coach is like we kind of work with teams, and we pull out how people are really feeling about change, right? And here's the thing: once you pull out those insights, once you surface what's beneath that iceberg, then you can address it head on, right? And sometimes we say that, oh, okay, yes, change and all, but here are some fears around it, right? In my day-to-day job, here are some fears around it. And then we can be very specific about addressing some of these questions and concerns if we're saying that, and fears, if we're saying that what we really want is change. Or alternatively, we may actually surface concerns that say to the system or the team that, hey, you know what? Yes, we kind of want to move towards change, but this is not the right time for us. And this is not the right move for us right now, right? So again, with the team, it's about like pulling out those, all of that stuff that's like beneath the surface, right? So that the team can address it head on.
That's great. And I think one of the things and thanks for defining coaching and systems coaching. One of the things we also talked about was like, what do people have to give up during change? From your experience coaching teams and working as a participant in the organization and the system, what have you observed? What do people give up during change?
I think the word that comes to mind really is control, usually. Especially when you talk about, and by the way, sometimes it's not even a choice. Change just happens, right? It's not like you get to tell the companies, no, stop hiring, like you're in the company, things just happen, right? And one of the things is control, especially when a company moves from a much smaller, tight-knit team to a much bigger team. One of the things you definitely give up is control, right? Like you go from, I know everything and what's going on in this company, right? To holy shit, there's too many things going on right now. I can't possibly know, what's going on anymore, right? So control is one part of it, and that's one example, right? It's like you just have to trust your team that they've got it, right? Even though you don't know what's going on, you just have to trust your team. Another instance of trust is that usually when we move from very sort of top-down functional driven companies, right? Like a top-down driven sort of management style to a more autonomous, like democratic, style. And like you may think it doesn't happen in startups, but what that looks like is, for example, if someone's managing, let's say, the engineering team, right? You manage 5 engineers, 10 engineers, you can be like, yeah, I know what each and every engineer is doing. All the stuff just comes to me and I'll like split out the work and let people do the work, right? You can't do that when you have 20 engineers anyway. I mean, you can, but then now you have managers in between, and by the time you filter down everything, it's super, super slow. the messages get changed, and now the teams are really, really slow. So oftentimes, one of the changes I work with different companies and different teams on is usually how do we move more from that style of managing towards a more democratic style. So autonomous teams, right? You start with autonomous teams. And now you realize as head of engineering, your engineers don't report to you anymore. They take orders from their product managers or, like whatever is needed on that team, right? So managers themselves have to move from being gatekeepers and I know about all the projects that come in and I can protect my engineers, right? Managers have to move from that mode and shift into, I don't know what my engineers are doing and it's fine. It's fine. My job is to be there to support them. My job is to be there to support them and help them when they come to me for help, right? But otherwise, I don't need to know all the details of everything that's going on in their project. So,
nice. So control.
Control.
It's like surrendering control, which I think is quite timely in this period of time, especially when we're talking about COVID, right? There's so much we have to surrender in terms of control. Any observations as you're still coaching teams during this period? They're going through COVID, they're moving to remote. Any observations? Does it make your work easier? Does it make your work harder when getting teams to change? Yeah.
What I'm noticing right now is I think in the last couple of weeks or so, when I've been talking to clients or potential, clients, and I've been like things just seem a little bit quiet recently, like what's going on. And then I realized a couple of days ago, I was living in my own bubble because I'm a solopreneur, right? Like I haven't, to be honest, haven't been super, and I live in Singapore, obviously, so I haven't been affected very much until, and I work with a lot of founders and senior leadership in startups and corporate innovation spin-offs, right? Until people started telling me, oh yeah, I'm so sorry, I haven't responded to you. We're adjusting to this new regulations. Oh, I'm so sorry, we had to shut our office in this other country. Oh yeah, it's madness here in India, and it just hit me, and I was like, oh, holy shit, people are dealing with a lot. People are dealing with a lot right now. So yeah. And then on the other hand, people that I coach one-on-one as well, it's like they come to me and they're like, I thought I was making progress, but I'm languishing again. So there's definitely something going on. I don't want to say just like in the air, well, literally in the air also, but but there's definitely a new wave of, yes, infections, but also a new wave of people struggling to try to adapt to, another new normal. So yeah, I have noticed that a bit.
Nice. And what I hear and what it seems like there seems to be a lot of unspoken, perhaps anxiety or that is maybe surfacing at the moment. So yeah, like I think we talk about demonstrating empathy and how that is important as an organization shifts and they're moving very, very fast. What are some of the best practices of doing that? I know you definitely have to practice that as a coach, but how can leaders demonstrate empathy more? Yeah.
So, actually, instead of the word empathy, the word I like to use is curiosity and compassion. Because I feel like empathy has a connotation of like you need to feel what the other person's feeling, which is not actually necessarily the case, right? But compassion, right? And compassion, which is like you're a fellow human being and one that I happen to work with, and I sort of kind of like you, right? But it's really asking the question, like where, this person that's in front of me, whether in face to face or over Zoom, like this person in front of me, what are they going through right now? What do they need? How are they actually doing, right? So compassion starts with curiosity, like how is this person doing?
think that's very timely. Any terms that that actually mentions our company name, I'm pretty happy about it. So that's great. Curiosity leads to compassion. That's the first time I'm hearing it, but that's really wonderful to hear. Um, so yeah, in terms of like, you know, as a leader, what are some of the common mistakes that you see happen when organizations are scaling, when startups are scaling, right? What do you see are the common mistakes, and what can founders or leaders do about that? Um, yeah.
So what's interesting is even as the company scales, right? Even as a company, and usually it comes with, say, a new round of funding, for example, right? Even as a company scales, um, what I've seen usually is that the leaders themselves, the CEOs, the founders, or whoever, right? Like the leaders themselves, like they themselves have to scale, right? And I don't mean scale, um, like what do I mean by that? Like you have to evolve, right? Like whatever worked for you leading a 20-person team, right, is not going to work for you when you're leading a 50-person team or a 100-person team, right? So every time I see a startup get funding and then now the company doubles in size, it's almost as if the leaders themselves have to completely reinvent themselves at every stage, in order to meet the new challenges. And that's really, really hard, especially if you talk about startups in the early days, right? Most people who start companies do so because they love building things. They love building products. They love being out there solving problems. And they're usually super smart. They're super resourceful. They're like, I can code, I can design, I can do product management, I can do marketing and sales as well. And they usually like, like pretty damn good at all of those things. That's why they're founders, right? Um, and then you realize at some point, maybe your company hits like 25 people, 50 people, thereabouts, you realize that doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work anymore. So you yourself have to grow as a leader in order to meet every single stage of growth.
Mm. Yeah, and I can relate so much to it as we're also growing and scaling the organization. So much feel for it, and being changing of the mindset, and even sometimes forgetting all these beliefs that I used to have. So I think that's really true. Is there any advice that you might have for leaders who are undergoing this process of change? And there's just so much change going on. It's not just COVID. It's also whether it's a good change or a bad change. Sometimes it's not just scaling up. Sometimes it's scaling down the team as well. Any
Yeah.
advice in dealing with this change mentally or psychologically?
I almost feel like if I give advice, like, I mean, this is one more reasons coaches don't give advice. Like, if you give advice, usually they're just like, okay,
Yeah, but
whatever.
tonight you have the
but
opportunity to. Yeah.
but so if I had to give one piece of advice, right? Honestly, like get yourself a good coach. Like get yourself a good coach. Because usually what happens, there's so much chaos and there's so much brokenness in a startup that it's really easy to lose sight of things. It's really easy to default back to I'm going to try to be a problem solver and a fixer and try to fix everything. But it's really hard to be an effective leader that way, right? So get yourself a good coach. A good coach is going to help you keep that vision in mind. Where are we going? What are we shooting for? Why are we doing this, right? A good coach is going to help you build your sense of self and your sense of identity. So you're not just like, I'm CEO of X startup and my job is my entire identity, right? Because ironically, in order to be an effective leader, you need to have a strong sense of self. Your team is looking towards you. If you don't have a strong sense of self, if your entire identity is tied into what happens to your startup and your company, guess what? Startups are up and down and up and down and up and down. If you are up and down and up and down and up and down, your team is going to feel up and down and up and down and up and down. What your team needs is stability. So build your sense of identity, right? Like, again, like work with a coach to do that, but like build your sense of self, right? Maintain perspective because your team needs that stability from you.
Yeah. I definitely agree, and I think that's true as well. Recently, I was doing a one-on-one with one of my team members, and
Mm,
I think at one point in time, because I was dealing with a lot of change in my life, like moving houses,
yeah.
and I told the team I was very stressed, and I was like almost like I really needed help, and I think what she told me at that time, my team member tells me is that, hey, you know, like when you're stressed, we are also stressed, I'm also stressed. So I'm like, oh wow, okay. So I have to be very mindful of my own action and behavior
Yeah.
as a leader, because that
Yeah.
also affects their mood and their emotion. If I don't project stability, if I and then I think anxiety will there will be even more anxiety in the team.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, it's true. I could be more self-aware, and especially in that
Mm,
situation, having
mm.
sort of a second opinion. I actually do work with a life coach.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the last 1 year while scaling the business.
That's it. That's it. I do want to say that it's not that leaders have to be perfectly calm and composed all the time, right? Um, it's more about there's a difference between acting like you're super stressed, which is like, oh, we need to get all these things done, right? Like there's a difference between that and coming out to your team, right, and say, hey guys, I'm pretty stressed right now because this other thing is going on in my life, or the business isn't going so well. I need help and I need support and I need you guys as my team, right? So because the opposite of like taking everything on yourself, leaders already carry a lot. Like they already carry a lot. And then trying to solve everything yourself and trying to take everything onto yourself and feeling like you can't show weakness to your team doesn't help.
Yeah, that is tough. Yeah.
Right. That's really tough. Like we can't be perfect all the time, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did have one of those moments where I communicated
Mm,
that to my own team. But it was good. Certainly, I think it's a balance, right? It's about being vulnerable, but also not to the stage whereby you feel helpless. And I
mm,
think that's also still having
yeah.
a good sense of that balance and of things. Um,
And
yeah.
what I would say to
Mm.
that as well is like as a leader, you need to find avenues to fill your own cup, you know, right? Like avenues outside of work to fill your own cup, right? And I think one very common thing, like when I coach leaders, right? They come in and I have sort of have them do an assessment of different types of aspects of their life, career being just one tiny slice of it, right? And they're like, oh, fun and recreation? What fun and recreation? Crap, that's like a 2 out of 10.
Yeah, I remember the. Did you ask
You
them to
know?
do the Wheel of Life thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, like it's a super simple tool. Anyone can do it.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a version, a free version that I just
Mm-hmm.
remind me to send you guys the link later.
Mm,
But you can do it on your own, obviously. So it's an exercise.
yeah.
It's great exercise. You can do it on your own. Um, but yeah, like as leaders, you need to find other avenues to fill your cup, whether it's from your partner or your spouse at home, right, or your other family, right, or your dog, or your friends at poker, or whatever your hobby is. Um, Victor, it's called the Wheel of Life exercise, and I think I will share the link with
Yeah.
Dalen. But he also sent one.
Yeah, I found it. Yes.
Yeah, awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like basically, as leaders, you have to find other ways also to fill your cup, because when your cup is full, that's how you're going to show up at work, and you can fill other people's cups at work, right? If your cup is completely empty, it's very hard to support other people.
That's true. I think that's on self-care, right? And that's also like that's so true in terms of filling your cup so that you can support other people.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's not just
hmm,
about bubble baths. Okay,
exactly.
they're
As
nice, but it's not just about bubble baths, right?
Yeah. And you've been a product leader before.
Mm, mm,
Any distinctions you bring into your practice as a product person,
mm.
perhaps like mental models or things like that into your coaching practice? Yeah.
Quite a few actually. So there's on the individual coaching part of it. When I work with especially for people who are going through transitions or people who are feeling really, really stuck about something, right? Sometimes I would say, you know what, let's just brainstorm. And this is what we do as part of design thinking, as part of product management, right? We just brainstorm and we're like, I don't care how big the ideas are, just throw out 8 ideas. We do crazy 8, throw out 8 ideas in 5 minutes. Okay, do it another time, and then do it another time, right? Like now we have 24 ideas. And it's just exercises to get people out of the mode of like, I have option A or option B and they both suck.
Okay.
So that's one. We like just throw ideas, brainstorm like different things you could do, and then like we do a bit of like design thinking as well. So which is like for people going through transitions, we're like, okay, you don't have to decide on what career or what path or what job you want to take right now. Experiment with it. You're like, oh, maybe I want to go down this path. You know what? You don't know, so just go experiment with it, right? You don't have to take a job and commit 3 years or 5 years of your life. Just go talk to other people who are in this job. Right. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's very nice that you bring in these tools that we practice as UX design practitioners or product professionals. Just out of curiosity, like, what kind of problems or challenges do people come to you when they engage you as a coach? What are some of the common issues or challenges that they bring to you?
So I have 2 main sets of clients, I would say. I have like my individual coaching clients, and then I also coach teams. With teams, I do both coaching and consulting, together. So for individual clients, usually, again, either they're usually going through a life transition. They're like, I'm not super happy where I am and I want change, or like, I'm in this new leadership position. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed and I want to learn how to get better at managing my team. So those are the 2 most common reasons that people come to me for individual coaching, at least. And then for teams is a little bit different. For teams, sometimes it's the challenges can manifest in all sorts of different ways, and it can be like, we're not quite sure what direction to take the business in. We have like these ideas, but they're not very solid. They're not very concrete, and we have no idea which direction to take the business in. And that's when we start applying some product management, concept to it, which is not so different from the design thinking one, right? Like we throw out ideas, we bring in the research, we experiment with it, and then we kind of see what works, right? Others are people come with product challenges, or my team is not working out. Like I have no idea why. Like we want to build a world-class design team and it's not quite there. Or like we don't know why like the product team is kind of not. So they come with these kind of challenges, and then usually the moment you unpack what's behind these challenges, it almost always comes down to people in the organization.
Yes, and I think that's a great message to kind of take away. And I just wanted to ask you, I'm sure you work with different teams before, and different teams have different culture and different systems. What would you say is the difference between maybe a product-focused team versus a team that's not so product-focused? Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that there are lots of non-product led companies out there that are extremely successful, extremely successful. So yes, even though I was a product manager by trade, I try not to have illusions of, that building a good product is the only way to succeed, as a company, because loads of counter examples. Yeah. So I think more importantly is, what is the DNA of this company oftentimes, right? When you talk about culture, some parts of culture are not entirely voluntary. Like I think, so I'll give you an example, right? I think initially when I first joined Salesforce, right, the founders came from a product background. right? They were building products for other companies before they started Saleswheel. The founders came from product backgrounds. We hired brilliant engineers. Our engineers were really like solid, like one of the most solid engineering teams in Singapore. Don't go poaching Saleswheel engineers, but very solid team, right? And
Yeah.
then we were doing this thing that felt very odd to me. It was like, okay, we were trying to go after enterprise deals, and like luckily or not so lucky for us, like enterprises were actually showing interest in our product, you know? So, but it just didn't feel very right for the company, you know? And then, you know, I think at some point, like one of the first weeks I was there, I pulled the CEO aside and I'm like, hey, Gabe, like, I know that maybe we're not ready for this. And our product at that time was still very much when you sign up, you get a customer success manager who will walk you through the entire product, help you get set up and, you know, the whole shebang. I was like, I know we're not ready for this, but I think we need a free product at some point. We need to move towards freemium at some point, right? And it wasn't until like 6 months or whatever later that like we were like, okay, you know what? Like the company finally had the conversation of how we're going to move from a product that charges honestly tens of thousands of dollars per annum to like offering a free product, right? But the moment we put it out there, it was like everyone was like, yes, 100% yes, this is what we need to do, because that simply just was the DNA of the company. The founders, all three founders had product DNA. The engineers that we hired were like that, and something just resonated. So today, like Saleswheel actually has a free product, not my credit. Saleswheel has a freemium product. They have a lot more users on the platform right now, and the product is much better as a result. So. But yeah, like you can't ignore the DNA of the core team. If you have a sales guy, you're going to have a more sales focused company.
I think that's really interesting that you brought up that DNA bit over here. Like, can you just help me understand a little bit better? Like, why was building a free product like the DNA of the company? How is it related to that? Yeah.
Well, okay, great question. Sorry, I missed a step there. So when you have a customer success manager hand-holding you at every step through the product, guess what? The product has to be good enough to deliver results, but you have someone hand-holding you, teaching you how to use the product, or someone actually using the product and setting it up for you, right? Like if you have a free product, you cannot afford to pay a customer success manager to do that, which means your product has to be so rock solid. Someone has to be able to sign up on your website, go into the product and set it up themselves. And I'll be honest, for an AI product, it's not easy to do that. It's not easy to do that, right? So
okay.
Yeah, freemium just forces you, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to do freemium, right? Like freemium just forces you to make the product so good, somebody who's not an expert user can figure it out on their own.
So that means the company and the organization has to step up on their user experience, has to set up on the way they think about product and onboarding, especially. Yeah, that's great. I can definitely relate to that.
Versus an enterprise product, right? Like if someone's paying you $300,000 a year or $1 million a year, you're gonna just throw people at it. You're gonna like, here's an account manager, here's a customer success manager, here's a technical support person. And then you just build whatever they tell you to build, right?
Yeah.
They're like, we'll pay you $20,000 if you add this feature. Okay.
I think that's
completely different type of business. And some companies are meant to build that kind of business because that's in their DNA, right? Maybe the founders are so good at doing enterprise software and enterprise deals.
Yeah, that reminds me of the more traditional organizations or the sales-led organizations. They are very good at that in terms of account servicing a customer and making sure they meet the requirements of that. So, and I think in general, you know, the work you're doing today, you know, what kind of work would you like to do more, right? As you're kind of growing your practice right now.
I would definitely, that's such a great question. Such a great question. You know, on the individual coaching side, I get, not surprisingly, I get a lot of founders and a lot of product leaders And I love doing that work because I love supporting, people who want to create something, right? But at the same time, of course, I would love to support a lot more women. Like my clientele is predominantly men. I have no idea why, but I would love to support a lot more female leaders actually. I would also love to work with people who are not necessarily in startups, right? So that's on that side, and on the sort of team coaching side, I think right now I tend to work with slightly smaller teams, and in addition to coaching, I do consulting as well. And consulting, it can be either on the product side or organization design side, which is like how can we design and create an organization that actually helps you execute on whatever plans and strategy that you have, right? Some of these frameworks, I know they work really well for companies below a certain size. So obviously working with larger teams would be interesting, sort of like, I'd be really keen to see how far we can take some of these frameworks. I suspect quite far. There's that. And I think going forward, I think in the plan also is new manager training, right? New manager training, any startup that does well is going to run into this problem, right? And it's one of the biggest problems and biggest hurdles for this companies growing up, right? Is new manager training. And I don't mean just your middle managers, right? I mean like even founders themselves are usually new managers, right? I know that a lot of the stuff that we learn as coaches, right, is so useful for managing people. Again, I actually genuinely being curious about people, asking how people like getting a sense for where they are, what they need, right? Which is why you hear a lot about coaching style leadership recently. But then there's also a lot of skills around being a good manager that is also outside of coaching. This is the one hurdle that every single startup that grows up needs to get across. So I think that there isn't a good program around right now. So for me, that's in the works.
Yeah, that's
That's
really
in the
great.
works. Yeah.
I think that's definitely a issue and concern. I was working for Razer back in 2018, and we were 1,500 people then, and we definitely recognize that this was an issue, right? Training up the middle management core and getting people to be good leaders was essential. Any high level thoughts on that? Like what should a new manager or new leader kind of like look out for? Yeah, because you've obviously been through sort of like the trial of fire several times. Yeah.
Oh, we just had a question to come in as well.
Yeah. We'll start with
Okay.
we'll start with mine first, and then I'll try and weave it in. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay. So I think that what happened for me, and you know what, like I think when I first started training as a coach, one thing that was a huge fundamental shift for me as a person, which I believe makes me a much better manager as well, is that as a coach, we don't fix our coachees' problems. That's not our job, right? Our job is to support the coachee to be the best that this person can be, so that they can go solve their own problems. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing broken about them. There's nothing to fix. We are not problem solvers. We are just there to support them. It's all about them, right? And it's not just all about them. In order to trust them to do that, you need to, so my school has a saying is we treat everyone, every single person is naturally creative, resourceful on the whole. They are creative enough, they are resourceful enough to solve their own problems, and they are a whole person. There's nothing broken about them, right? And I think that like once I understood that shift, like I've read so many manager books like over the last 10, 15 years that like once I understood that shift, it changed everything for me. It just changed everything for me. I was like, oh, so that's how I'm supposed to be as a manager. My job is not to solve their problems, Like my job is just to support them to be the best person that they can be, or the best employee that they can be for this company. And if, well, the best person that they want to be, right? And if there is no longer a fit between what the company needs and what they need, then it's time for them to leave because it no longer serves them. And it
Well,
no longer serves the team as well. It no longer serves the
mm,
team, and it no longer serves the company to keep them.
yeah, that is
Yeah.
definitely a very refreshing point of view. It's almost it definitely relates to what you say, right? It's being compassionate, right? And it's being understanding that and being inclusive as well.
And to me, it's respect. It's respect. This is like respect that you have for another person and another human being, right? Which is why for me, managing is one sort of relationship. You can extend that argument to your kids, right? Like, yes, your kids don't have as much experience as you. They may not be able to do things as neatly and tidily as you want them to, but you know what? Like, they are a whole person, and however young they are, we respect them. And like, that's really good. Like for a 5-year-old, that's really, really good.
It's just recognizing that. And
Yeah.
we have Siaida from the audience asking, if
Mm,
I'm a team member
mm,
and I know my team leader or founder is struggling with the
mm,
responsibilities, what can I do?
mm. That's such a great question. Um, well, I would say that there are 2 parts to it. One is the relationship between you and them, right? Uh, are they struggling? So there are 2 parts to that system, right? One part is you and your manager, right? And then the question is, first, is that part doing well, right? And if that part is not doing well, right, then what you can do is to just be straightforward and just be like, you can help your manager out. Like, managing, honestly, is one of the hardest things ever. Help your manager out, right? Like, don't make your manager guess what you need. Just go up to them and be like, this is what I need, right? I don't have clarity in my job scope. I need more clarity, right? I don't know what success looks like in this project. I need to know what that looks like. I feel like I don't have the resources to do this thing that you're asking me. Please give me resources. I don't know how to do this thing. Please help me, right? So the more upfront you can be with your manager, the easier you're making it, it for your manager to manage you, right? So that's one part of the system. Then the other part of the system is your entire team itself, right? Your entire team itself, right? Honestly, then when it's the entire team itself, then I don't know. One part of it is maybe it's possible to talk to your manager to say, hey, look, I see that maybe you're struggling. You could suggest to them to get some help, right? And either they might get help from their managers, or they might get help from external or internal coaches, or whatever it is. But like, you can just be very straightforward. This person, like, hey, I see that you're struggling, right? Either you can get external help, or how can we as a team help you? Because guess what? Your manager is also part of your team.
That's true. Yeah, they're not
Right?
Superman or Superwoman.
Exactly. And one of the tenets that we have in team coaching is, regardless of your hierarchy, every voice is an equal voice in the team. Well, if you're into democratic teams, right? Or at least that's my belief. When I coach teams, I'm like, okay, we're into democratic teams. It doesn't mean everything gets decided by consensus, but every voice is an equal voice in the team.
Yeah, that's a good lesson
Your
here.
manager is still it's not your manager, and then the team is your manager is literally part of the
It's
team.
part of the team. Yeah,
Yeah. So
that's an
come
important
together.
distinction.
Come together as a team, like, talk about it openly, right? And again, iceberg, right? The 90%, the more you surface, the easier it makes for the team to solve problems together. And this is literally what we call psychological safety.
Yes.
Right? If you guys like read like different studies, I think Google did a study on all of their teams, and they realized the number one predictor for how successful a team is psychological safety. And psychological safety means if someone sees that something isn't working, right, they should feel safe enough to come out and say it. right? If someone feels like they have a crazy idea, they should feel safe enough to be able to come out and say it. And here's the thing, most people wait for their teams to have psychological safety. But I realized that what I learned is that like when you start exhibiting behaviors that show psychological safety, it encourages other people to do the same.
So
right?
you mentioned exhibiting behaviors. What would some of these behaviors look like?
So one very straightforward one is, so one very simple one, right, is literally just say what's on your mind, right? However unformed your thought is, however not so coherent it is, however crazy this idea is, I sometimes, straight out say to one of my friends, and I'm like, hey, gee, like, like I hear what you're saying with this suggestion, but I'm a little bit scared that this might have other consequences. Here are my considerations. So I'm like, I realized the moment I say, I'm a little bit worried about this, right? It allowed my teammate to come out and say, oh yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying, you're being worried about this, I'm worried about this other thing. I'm like, oh, that's a great point, right? And because we can have this very honest conversation about our fears and what we're worried about, we can then come together to address these things. Again, surfacing parts of the icebergs that are submerged so that you can tackle them as a team together. The more you surface, the more you can tackle it.
That's really
Yeah,
wonderful.
so don't shy away from the scary conversations. Don't shy away from the like I don't know, you got to be like, I think I'm going to look stupid, but I'm going to do this anyway. Or like, I think I'm going to come out and look like the bad guy, but I'm going to do this anyway.
I'll ask a question I hope it's not too controversial. I think especially, let's say if you're a minority in a group, right? Whether it's because of your race or whether it's because you're a woman and you're in a male-dominated environment, how should you approach it, or how should you move ahead and actually do this, right? And practice what you said. Yeah.
Oh, that's such a great question. Oh my God. Wow, that's such a great question. And being as big of an advocate for diversity and inclusion as I am, like, it's not even a question that I sort of thought about. But
what about speaking from your own experience, like, because you're one of the few women leaders in a product or a tech organization, right? Yeah.
What I realize is sometimes in order to speak truth, that in order to speak your truth, right, it's not about being blunt, right? It's not about being like just untactful, right? You got to know what's important to you, right? You got to know what's important to you. What do you stand for, right? Because when you know what you stand for, then it gives you the courage to come out and say something, right? And of course, again, it's very easy to speak for someone who isn't worried about getting another job if they get fired, right? I mean, I don't know. But again, like, if that's important to you, right? If, let's say, for example, what's important to you is, I need to make sure I have financial security because I don't believe I can get another job that easily, right? Not in this climate, and I need to have financial security. Then maybe one of the best things that you can do is literally just be like, nope, I'm not going to fight this battle, right? This thing is not important enough for me to risk my job, right? So I think coming from that place of knowing what's really, really important to you, right? That's one part. And also, what are you worth, right? It may be that what's really important to me is being on a team where I can have this, right? And I can have this dynamic, right? Like being on a team that believes in equitability, like, that's really important for me. And if I'm going to say something controversial and people are like, no, we're not going to accept that, then at some point for me, it's like, okay, you know what? This is not the right team for me, or this is not the right client for me. And I'm okay if I lose this client.
That's wonderful. And thank you for answering the question. I was just wondering if you have any parting words before we end this conversation.
Wow, you have so many good questions. Well, I would say that there's been a lot of change in the last couple of weeks. There's a lot going on, everyone. So, be kind to the people around you, and most importantly, be kind to yourself. It doesn't matter if you're not crushing it or kicking ass or being a ninja or whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter. Just, be kind to yourself and be kind to the people around you. Work can wait. Well, in most cases, okay? Unless you're fighting COVID on the front line, mostly work can wait.
That's wonderful advice.
Yeah, take care of yourself and take care of the people around you.
As you mentioned earlier, you have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of the people around you. And with that, thank you, Eileen, for coming and sharing your wisdom and your experience, and also some of the things in terms of the mental models and the frameworks that you share. I'm sure will be very helpful for new managers and new leaders moving forward. So thank you, and we'll end the live session here, and we'll see you next month for another guest webinar session where we're talking about leading into change and working in product teams. And with that, thank you.
Bye, everyone.